Welcome into the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, discussing Anthony Rendon and the Los Angeles Angels set to retire. Contract finally over. We'll see. Comparing Anthony Rendon to Kris Bryant. Could Kris Bryant have a similar fate with retirement down the line? What will the Rockies do with him? He still has 3 years at $27 million each going through the 2028 season. And Hal Steinbrenner's comments from the New York Yankees. Is he really just trying to play a game of chess? Are his comments being blown out of proportion, or are you just not reading between the lines well enough? But let's talk about Kris Bryant. It's funny that the news with Anthony Rendon is, well, in the news right now. But it was last week, about a week and a half ago, where former assistant general manager of the Rockies, Zach Rosenthal, actually joined Harold Reynolds and Meth Excursion over on MLB Network to discuss the current free agent class. And, Rosenthal just ultimately discussed how teams do a lot of their free agent planning in season. A lot of it might take place even after the trade deadline. Are you buying? Are you selling? Are you looking ahead to this winter's free agent crop? And certainly after the trade deadline, it becomes a little bit easier to do that. Colorado, in the present tense, does not have that luxury, as Paul DePodesta is still going through a series of firsts. In many ways, I wouldn't even necessarily call this his first true offseason, because he's going to need to see what he's got in 2026 before he determines what he needs in 2027. By no means is that any kind of pass or any kind of excuse that I'm making early on, but that is the reality of the situation. Remember, Paul DePodesta did not sign himself Dick Monfort, and Walker Monfort chose to bring in somebody that has not been within the confined walls, if you will, of Major League Baseball. He worked with a different professional organization in a completely different sport with different rules. Still a lot of carryover. In the Venn diagram of being a front office executive between the NFL and baseball, there is still a lot of overlap. However, you don't typically see a move like this. So it's going to take a little bit longer than I think a lot of people might expect for a really good mind like a Paul DePodesta. In the chat, Felix, first one reporting for duty. Happy Thanksgiving. Right back at you. I was in pain about an hour ago because I ate too much. I didn't actually think I ate that much, but I was in pain. Nevertheless, I don't know what it was. Could have been the Topo Chicos, the seltzer in the belly. Feeling a lot better now. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Go for a walk. I think that helps move things around just a little bit in a positive sense. Probably should have talked about Thanksgiving and my meal and my eating before I jumped into all of this, talking about derailing things, but appreciate you, Felix, as always. But Paul DePodesta up against it here this first offseason for him, this first start to him becoming the president of baseball operations. Zach Rosenthal also being asked last Tuesday about who is the most coveted free agent this offseason. And keyword is most coveted free agent, not who's going to make the most money, but who's the most coveted. And he said Kyle Schwarber, and I cannot disagree at all there. Kyle Schwarber won't make the most money, and it won't be a deal that will necessarily help his team in 4 or 5 years from now, the same way like younger players like Bo Bichette, Dylan Cease, Munetake Murakami. But Schwarber is coveted. This is a winning player that is used to winning every single year. And I say that he might not help his next team in the next 4 or 5 years, but if he continues to age as gracefully as someone like a David Ortiz, if he's David Ortiz 2.0, then yeah, in 5 years, he can still be a major value to his next team. Keep in mind, when David Ortiz retired in his age 40 season, he had 5.1 wins above replacement. That was his 4th best season. So David Ortiz definitely made a late push. He was a great player in his early 30s still, but it seemed like the Hall of Fame was probably something that was going to be too far out of reach because of his late start. Sure, there's all the PED situation going on with him, but Kyle Schwarber is a guy that right now it's hard to see him being a Hall of Famer. but he's still got time to put in work, and he very well could get there. If he continues to age like a fine wine, I think he will. You know what? I think he will get there. I think it might be 51-49% the odds, but I think that Kyle Schwarber is going to get there to make his case. We also have to keep in mind that that bar for being a Hall of Famer is definitely different than it was a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago. So it's no longer about really reaching certain numbers, certain milestones. So I think Schwarber is going to get there. One of the other things that Rosenthal discussed, and this is the reason I bring him up in talking about Kris Bryant, Anthony Rendon, is about how the deal came together, where Kris Bryant signed that 7-year, $182 million pact before the 2022 season, an offseason where coincidentally, Kyle Schwarber only ended up getting $79 million over 4 years with the Phillies. Nick Castellanos actually got 5 years, $100 million. So that was an offseason where the Rockies could have had Kyle Schwarber, and he was a player that the Rockies were interested in. Rosenthal said on MLB Network last week, there was a lot going on with the Rockies at that time. We had just come off a couple of pretty good years. Obviously, the Nolan Arenado trade had gone down, which it did in February of 2021. And this was as much of a signing about putting the Rockies back on the map and showing everybody that, hey, we're willing to spend some money and ownership is willing to do that. End quote. Of course, I'm not going to take anything he said out of context, but I think that gives you an indicator as to what Dick Monfort and what ownership is trying to do. Prove that they're going to spend money and that they are very much considering the names on the backs of their jerseys and marquee names and selling tickets more so than trying to win a championship. There were people within the Rockies organization that wanted Kyle Schwarber. In fact, go back and listen to a lot of the conversations I had with Drew Goodman from then AT&T Sportsnet, now Rockies TV, host of the Drew Goodman podcast. Highly recommend you check that out. He actually sits down with Warren Schaefer this week. But every time I talked to Drew Goodman, he kept saying Kyle Schwarber should be the man for the job. And you can't help but think, not in the same way about what if they had signed DJ LeMahieu after 2018. Certainly that's an easy one to hypothesize and theorize what could have happened because it was there. It was right at their fingertips. Schwarber was there too, but it's a little different because he was never a Rocky. But that's another sliding door moment where if it was Kyle Schwarber in 2022, maybe the turnaround happens and maybe they don't lose 100 games 3 years in a row because Kyle Schwarber has a winning pedigree. And okay, you can look and say Kris Bryant did too as part of those Cubs teams, but was he an integral part of that? If you talk with the people behind the scenes, was it Kris Bryant being a very good player on a very good team, or was Kris Bryant a winning player? I think you can say that about Kyle Schwarber. He has more than proven that. One of the things Zach Rosenthal also added in this conversation was, quote, in terms of negotiations, to be honest, Scott Boras deals with owners a lot more on these types of contracts. And we know that to be true. We know that you can get an owner's ear and say, this is why you need this guy. And don't listen to all those people that you're paying to make very good informed baseball decisions. Don't listen to them. Listen to me. Listen to that voice on your shoulder telling you how you're going to make money. But Kyle Schwarber was one of the target. And in fact, Rosenthal even added that it just came to, at the end of the day, what the guys at the top of the food chain wanted to do and how they thought it would impact the on-field and off-field for the club. So interesting comments, nothing crazy, nothing too extreme, but further evidence, further detail as to what went down ahead of the 2022 season. Will in the chat, if Schwarber plays until he's 40, so 8 years, and he plays close to his home run season average, he'll have 600 home runs. Yeah, that's absurd. So even if he takes a dip down from that, 500 is gettable. 500 is very doable. And I don't think you even need 500 home runs to get in the Hall of Fame anymore. Granted, there are guys like a Carlos Delgado who, wasn't that far away from 500 and was on a ballot one time. So guys get into the Hall of Fame. They might not be a first ballot player. They might not be a BBWAA selection, but you can get to that Hall of Fame. And, Kyle Schwarber's got a lot of fun other numbers that are going to help him out. Larry Walker, as great of a player as he was, which we all know here, if you're listening to this podcast or you're watching the Rockies Insider over on YouTube, as great of a player as he didn't have a postseason resume in the same way that Kyle Schwarber does or David Ortiz does. So those things can certainly help somebody like a Kyle Schwarber, a fun-loving guy in the same way that David Ortiz, the PED allegations against him didn't stick. So I don't think anything can hurt Schwarber in regards to falling short of some of those major milestones, but way to crunch the numbers there on that a little bit. Well, do appreciate that. So the question is, when is new president of baseball operation? Let's try that again. I'm going to take a sip here. The question is, when does new president of baseball operations, Paul DePodesta, going to say goodbye to Kris Bryant? Is there a chance he doesn't say goodbye? Could he potentially give another year to Kris Bryant to figure things out with his body? Is there actually that potential? Is there enough hope to say, you know what? If we have to wait another year, we're going to have to pay this guy regardless. He's getting $79 million over the next 3 years, regardless. But what if we give him one more year? Maybe he can come back for 2 more years in 2027 and 2028. Could that happen? Could DePodesta wait to make his move at the winter meetings? Now, I think in many ways, doing it at the winter meetings, I don't know. So you could make the case that during the winter meetings, there's going to be a lot of other news that buries this information, right? Everyone in Denver is going to know about it. They'll be talking about it on the TV stations, radios, podcasts, you name it. Of course, we know that's going down. You can't hide from that. You can't hide from this contract. But nationally, at least, it could get lost in the shuffle just a little bit. However, I think the opposite is more true. This is the biggest party. It is the biggest marquee event of the off season where everyone is paying attention. And I think fans have an opportunity to get juiced up at the start of the winter. Sure, we've already had Josh Naylor and Dylan Cease get taken off the board, but we know those are typically outliers and things don't really start to heat up until the winter meetings. That's the start of the hot stove season. And if you make that move to waive or designate for assignment Kris Bryant, I think there's a lot more eyes on it. There's a lot more people talking about it nationally. The same amount of people are going to talk about it in Denver, but more people are going to talk about it nationally. I also have to wonder if a move to get rid of Kris Bryant happens sooner than later, simply because of the news with Anthony Rendon and the Los Angeles Angels, who appear to finally be getting ready to shed Rendon's existence from their organization. He signed a 7-year, $245 million contract ahead of the 2020 season, just after the Nationals had won the World Series in 2019. And it was a critical cog for the Nats during that World Series run. But since signing that deal, he was good for 1 season, and you can put an asterisk next to that because that was the 2020 season. It was very short. So he was there for a majority of it, was fine. But the regular full seasons of 162 games, not so much. We're talking 258 games with the Angels over the past 6 seasons, with a high of 58 games in 2021. Has actually been worth a positive wins above replacement, 3.9 BWAR. So I guess that's something, but he's unfortunately been far too injury plagued. Multiple things, not one area, multiple things. He's been on the IL for a groin strain, a knee contusion, left hamstring strain, hip impingement, right wrist inflammation, right wrist surgery, a second left groin strain, a left wrist contusion, a left shin contusion, a left hip impingement, a left hamstring strain. Left side is just breaking down for him. Low back inflammation and a left oblique strain. I think he missed this entire 2025 season because of a hip injury. So the Angels are looking to buy out the 7th and final year of his deal at $38 million. And he would probably be paid out over a deferred fashion. So he's going to get his money, but it's going to take a little bit longer think Bobby Bonilla contract 2.0 for him. And in doing so, Rendon would retire at that point, and then the Angels would have some short-term spending flexibility because now, all right, they can probably free up at least 25 million just for 2026 alone to help them out. And yeah, they take small hits down the line as they continue to pay this deferred contract to Anthony Rendon. But it becomes a little bit harder for the Rockies to do something like that because we're talking $79 million that they would have to pay out or defer. And that's more than double what Rendon's getting. And I also don't know that Kris Bryant wants to retire at age 33. He's got 3 years remaining on his deal, 26, 27, 28, and he could potentially make a comeback. It's unlikely from his lumbar degenerative disc disease, that back injury he's been dealing with. But again, after another year of downtime, maybe another surgery of some sort. He had the ablation surgery that was done to help out with some of the pain. It hasn't really helped out very much, so everything is uncertain for his future. But that very well could be in the cards. We don't know if DePodesta has spoke to Kris Bryant yet, what those conversations have been like. But as I've been saying, because DePodesta has to learn a lot very quickly, I don't know that he is going to jump to any conclusions very quickly. So yeah, there's a lot he needs to learn quickly, but he doesn't need to make a decision about Kris Bryant right now. As frustrating as that might be to some of you out there who hear that, he doesn't need to make that decision. You may want him to. You may hope that he does, but he doesn't need to. And it could be a while until something happens. But maybe this news about Anthony Rendon retiring could possibly jumpstart that. I actually compared over on StatHead. I probably should put it out on social media. The careers so far with their respective teams. Anthony Rendon with the Angels, Kris Bryant with the Rockies. Essentially 4 wins above replacement for Rendon to negative 1.6 for Kris Bryant. Rendon has been better than Bryant in every category. The counting stats are the easiest because he did have a 2-season head start over Kris Bryant, but batting average, Kris Bryant 2 points higher, on base percentage, Rendon 24 points higher, slug 1 point higher for Kris Bryant, but OPS is higher in favor of Anthony Rendon, OPS plus by 16 points. Anthony Rendon, league average guy at 100 OPS plus. So a really bad contract for him. Bad deal for Kris Bryant. Rendon's contract was worth exactly $50 million more. Excuse me, $60 million more. So, okay, Rendon's been slightly above average, but that's not worth $60 million. No doubt about it. Cameron saying, happy Thanksgiving. Good to see you there, bud. Nate, appreciate you, buddy. Chances we sign one of these Japanese players. Is it 1% or is it 0.01%? Or it could just be 0.1%, right? 1/10 of 1%. I don't think likely at all. It would be interesting to know if maybe DePodesta does have some contacts over in Japan that could catch him up to speed, where one of those lower priced Japanese players, usually there are several relievers that will come over from KBO or NPB that have had a lot of success that you can sign to a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. It's going to be a little bit harder to convince anyone to pitch in Colorado, even on a 1-year deal. A lot of these players would probably be more inclined to stick around in Japan or Korea for one more season and then go back out there and try the market, because it's a tough assignment to pitch in Denver and to pitch at Coors Field. So I don't know that that's going to happen. I've been speculating that it could be a wise decision for the Rockies to go out and see if they can acquire someone like a Masataka Yoshida from the Red Sox, pay his contract, even if the Red Sox chip in a little bit. You might even be able to bring in a Red Sox prospect or a big league ready player. And you're also getting a big league ready player in Yoshida and jumpstarting your brand in Japan and get it into that Japanese market, a market in which the Rockies have not been a part of since 2007 with Kaz Matsui. They haven't been a part of the Asian market in any capacity since 2019 when they had Sungwon Oh, who was as a pitcher from South Korea. So they've just stayed away from that entirely. And I think it's going to take time for them to build up some infrastructure in Japan. But maybe DePodesta, again, has those contacts, and he might be able to make a small investment in starting that infrastructure and getting the Rockies name out there just a little bit. So I think the odds are incredibly low, but I would hope that DePodesta can convince Dick and Walker Monfort that it is worth investing in Japan and having ties and connections like that. Great question about acquiring players from smaller or lesser known leagues. Why don't the Rockies sign Trevor Bauer still? Dude was pitching in Mexico at a higher altitude and did well. That's complicated for many reasons. First off, why aren't any teams interested in Trevor Bauer? Something's going on there. You'd have to think, right? So it's not just the Rockies. Not to say that your question isn't fair, but it wouldn't be fair to say the Rockies are so foolish. Why wouldn't they even give this guy a try? No one is giving him a try, first and foremost. Secondly, personality-wise, Trevor Bauer is the exact opposite of the players the Rockies typically try to target. They like good soldiers. They like guys that don't make too many waves. It doesn't mean everyone's a choir boy all the time in the Colorado Rockies. No, that's impossible. But the Rockies do prefer players like that. It's one of the reasons why I said on yesterday's podcast, the last one you listened to, is why Tommy Pham probably isn't going to be a good fit, despite the fact where he could provide some value and veteran leadership to a young group of players and a young outfield. But that's not going to happen for personality reasons in general. Lux saying Eric Sim and the Baseball Bat Bros. Yeah. They make good content. I definitely don't watch as much as I used to. Scott asking about DePodesta. Are you encouraged? Yeah, I'm absolutely encouraged. Certainly, this is somebody that is going to be doing things a lot differently than Bill Schmidt. I think DePodesta is going to be a lot more closely aligned to what we saw out of a Jeff Bridich, who, despite the fact the way he treated media, which wasn't great, I think DePodesta is going to be better than that. Despite the fact the way Bridich imploded there at the end with the Nolan Arenado situation, let's not forget, this was a guy who took over and was able to make the Rockies into contenders and take them to the postseason about 2 years into his job. And is still the only general manager to go to back-to-back postseasons with this organization. So for all the criticism that Jeff Bridich gets and deserves, let's not forget that he is arguably, and I don't know if the argument would really even be that difficult, but he has to be very much in the conversation for greatest general manager in franchise history. If you're looking at win-loss record, if you're looking at going to the postseason, if you're looking at relevancy, the Jeff Bridich era, the Rockies were very relevant. You have to give him some credit. So perhaps Paul DePodesta can bring the Rockies back to an era like that. Now, getting back to Kris Bryant and Anthony Rendon, while on the field, they've been very similar. And by on the field, I mean they haven't been on the field very much. Off the field, very different. Very different. Kris Bryant, not a lot of controversy surrounding him. There were the comments that he made a few seasons ago in spring training about, in fact, frankly, I don't really understand that time and the criticism he received, because my interpretation of what he read was not that bad. I think at the time, people believed that Kris Bryant was throwing the prospects under the bus, saying that these young players were not very good. When my interpretation of what he said was that he hadn't done his homework and he simply thought that the prospects were supposed to make an impact a lot sooner than later, because we're definitely on the later part of the spectrum. When he signed in 2022, we're still waiting for some of those guys, and some of those guys weren't even in the organization just yet. So I didn't necessarily interpret it in the same way as a lot of other people. That was, I guess, a minor controversy at the time. I think it was it last offseason? His Lamborghini was stolen, but that's not very much of a controversy. So, he's been a good egg. He talks to the media when he is requested. He's not around the clubhouse a ton, but is always generous with his time if he is there, and will speak openly and honestly. So in that case, okay, that's probably what you should be doing. So I'm not really giving him any praise for that. But I say that to underline the fact that for Anthony Rendon, since he's been with the Angels, it's not been pretty. He has not been a good Boy Scout. He was suspended in 2022 for 5 games when he was injured. He was on the IL and he got involved in a brawl with the Mariners. Not great. There was that incident in 2023 where he had an altercation with an A's fan, grabbed him by the shirt, took a swipe at him, even cursed at him. Not great. When he was on my buddy Jack Vita's show, what's going on, Jack? Looking forward to seeing you at the winter meetings. Talked about how the baseball season is too long. It needs to be shortened. Doubled down on that when talking with Sam Blum of The Athletic, talking about baseball and the concerns about his comments. Quote, "It's never been a top priority to me," referring to baseball. "This is a job. I do this to make a living. My faith, my family come first before this job." And end quote. Rendon has also, many times been combative with the media, saying, "Hey, I've answered your questions. Why you keep picking at this?" So Rendon, a bit problematic behind the scenes, just a little bit. So say what you will, but Kris Bryant has behaved. Got to give him some credit there. In the chat, let's see what these other guys are saying here. Luke, appreciate you, bud. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Yes, Trevor Bauer, toxic locker room. Could be, he's a changed man. I think he probably deserves an opportunity, but I don't know who's going to give him that opportunity, right? There certainly would be a definite spotlight for sure. Also a comment, Jeff Bridich, handcuffed by Dick Monfort. Absolutely. Again, that's going to be the hardest part. That's one of the reasons why I've said many times, I don't think being the general manager of the Colorado Rockies is as exciting and as enticing of a job as many people make it seem to be. It is on paper. It is in a vacuum. But as long as Dick Monfort is running the team and has a very loud voice and will often think his voice and his thought process and his logic is the only one that matters at the end of the day. He listens to everyone. That's not to say, he makes unilateral decisions, but he does. He's going to listen to you, but at the end of the day, he's going to do what he wants to do, and that's his prerogative. He is the owner. But as long as you have somebody above you in that way, it's going to be hard to make being a general manager or president of baseball operations enticing for anybody who wants a gig just like that. Davo saying, circling back to some Japanese players, maybe some guys out of Hokkaido, similar altitude issues in that part of Japan, maybe an easier transition for some of those guys. To be honest, I don't actually know what the altitude is in a lot of those cities in Japan. Obviously, they've got volcanoes there, and they've got Mount Fuji. But are we talking 5,000 feet above sea level? Which, I mean, Japan is at sea level. It's an island, right? So I don't know that it would be that high. Let's see. I'm getting population density. No, I'm not getting exactly how many feet above sea level, but I don't think it would be that extreme. Keep in mind there was a time in which Atlanta Fulton County Stadium was known as the launching pad because it was a little over 1,000 feet above sea level. That was a big number back in the 80s. 1,000 feet above sea level. No wonder why the ball's taken off. We're at 5 times that here in Denver, right? So it's interesting. Again, these are all good theories. These are all good things worth looking into for sure. Luke saying, has Warming Bernabel played second before? Do you like Ritter or Amador as opening day third baseman? Bernabel does have a third base background. Could he eventually transition over to second base? It's not out of the realm of possibilities, certainly, but there were some defensive issues that he had at the hot corner. That's one of the reasons why he's exclusively played first base in the majors. But could he end up going over to second base? Could, if you really believe in his bat, he could end up going over to second base. Ryan Ritter, Adiel Amador. I think Amador still has the higher ceiling Ryan Ritter is going to be a more consistent player at second base. Ritter can also play shortstop in a much more talented fashion than Ariel Amador. So I think that leaves Ritter as more of your utility infield type. So I see Ritter on the opening day roster in that way. Perhaps depending on the handedness of the starting pitcher, Ryan Ritter does get the start at second base. So of those three, between Bernabel, Ritter, and Amador, I'd probably go with Ryan Ritter there. But who's going to get a bulk of the starts at second base next season? I would tend to think Ariel Amador might actually end up there with the most. We'll see if second base is another one of those, is a position that they target again in free agency or in a trade, in the same way that they did with Tyra Estrada and Kyle Farmer last offseason. I think there's still a lot there at second base. So we'll see what happens with that. And this is an interesting comment too, that we don't know that much about. I really hope Tovar plays in the World Baseball Classic. That would be pretty great. That would be awesome. In fact, I need to get Sean Spradlin on the pod here. Good friend. Looking forward to seeing him at the winter meeting as well. I'm name dropping like too much. Not cool. But World Baseball Classic, it's a sticking point for some guys, depending on when they're a free agent, when they come together with their team, get an extension, and that can impact when a player participates in the World Baseball Classic. And for someone like Ezequiel Tovar, who already has his extension out of the way, he is trying to reestablish himself after an injury-plagued 2025. So I could see him still being young enough and saying, you know what, right now might not be that time, knowing full well that it could be another, say, 6 years. I don't think it'll be that long again, but it's very well going to be another 4 years until the next World Baseball Classic. He'll be older, but we're talking 27, 28 years old. He'll still be able to play. So that is an interesting thing to kick the tires on. Maybe it's about 50-50 if Tovar will participate for Team Venezuela. I can't name a better Venezuelan shortstop than Tovar in the chat. Yeah, because Omar Vizquel, I got to think his defensive skills have definitely fallen off as of recent. And Tovar over Orlando Arcia, yes, that also checks out too. So we'll see. Let me get to my last little bit. You can continue to ask questions in the chat over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast side of things, you can still go over and leave a comment, even if it's nothing about what I'm talking about. I see the comment and I am still able to respond to it. So let me know what you think. But the last little tidbit of the day is the comments made by Hal Steinbrenner. He was challenged about the Yankees being profitable. And he said, quote, "I don't want to get into it, but that's not a fair statement or an accurate statement. Everyone wants to talk about revenues. They need to talk about our expenses, including the $100 million expense to the city of New York that we have to pay every February 1st, including the COVID year. It all starts to add up in a hurry." A lot of people had issues with that. As if Steinbrenner is saying the Yankees are not profitable. That is not what he's saying. He is trying to muddy the waters as if they are not profitable. He didn't say that, but he wants you to think about that. He wants you to think about that when the owners are crying poor this time next offseason and we have a potential lockout. Remember, he starts by saying, "I don't want to get into it, but that's not a fair statement or an accurate statement about a team being profitable." Because that is what the owners are going to try to say next offseason when the CBA expires, is that, man, it's really hard to make money on these teams if only player salaries were less. That is what Steinbrenner was ultimately trying to get to. He is trying to help out those middle tier, middle market, smaller market clubs. And the Yankees trying to help the smaller clubs is gonna make him look really good when he's around those other 29 owners. And they're saying, man, these large market clubs, it's making it hard for us. Hey, I helped you out. Like, it needs to be a two-way street. That's what these comments are about. If he's truly saying they're not profitable, which again, I don't think he is, but let's say that any owner is trying to say that their team is not profitable, then open the books. Let's discuss it. Let's discuss it. If you're saying that, that's true, then okay, I guess you need a salary cap. But no, that's not legit. Owners want and the league wants a salary cap without any evidence of needing it. They want it. Why would he want to say this? He's not going to say that. We know that. So why does he say that? Why would he want to say that? Again, it's to help create a narrative that owners need a salary cap. And the salary cap just means that large market clubs, and there are a lot of them, can't spend all the money that they're making. And it means a salary floor only means there's going to be a few teams, Marlins, A's, Pirates, are going to have to spend a little bit more than they already do. That does not help the Players Association. That hurts the MLBPA, and it helps the billionaire owners. And if you want to break up a union in the United States, also that it feels like the hobby that we all have is a little bit more competitive, I think you're missing the point just a little bit. There we go. In the chat, popping off just a little bit. I will definitely get to some of these. But let's keep in mind, let's take a step back from the Dodgers going back to back, which I think might skew things just a little bit. It's still fair. It's still fair comments, fair statements to say like, oh man, the Dodgers win everything. They get all the best players. Keep in mind, other than 2020, which was a shortened season and was a crapshoot, you play that over again, 1,000 times. I think the Rockies could even win one of those World Series. But twice in a 162 game season since 1988. It's hard to do. So a top 10 payroll club won the World Series for the 4th consecutive year. It's the 6th time out of the last 7. And we haven't had a bottom 15 club win the World Series since the Royals did in 2015. But it should also be noted that since 2015, there have been 15 bottom half teams by market size that have won in the NFL, NBA, and NHL. So you're going, hey, they got salary caps. That would be a really good thing. But the Players Association have come out and said, well, those numbers can be a little bit skewed, just a bit, because we're talking about teams in MLB who pay a luxury tax in addition to money that from exceeding certain salary thresholds. So the Dodgers totaled $509 million, according to the CBT, but $168 million of that was taxed. So it didn't actually even go to players. I know Tony Clark spoke with some media and he said, quote, those numbers are misleading on the face because they include as payroll luxury tax amounts that are not directly paid to players on those teams. In fact, about half of the luxury tax proceeds are rerouted directly to small market clubs as a form of revenue sharing, and the other half are used to fund benefits for players on all 30 teams. Since the year 2000, let's keep in mind, MLB has had 16 teams win a championship. Say what you will about the Dodgers going back to back and having 3 MVPs on their team and maybe a 4th if Yoshinobu Yamamoto puts it all together wire to wire next year. But since 2000, 16 teams have won the World Series. How many have won the Stanley Cup in the NHL? 14. How many have won the Super Bowl in the NFL? 13. How many have won the NBA championship? 12. Since 2000. More teams have won a World Series, have won a championship in Major League Baseball than the other 3 major sports. And they've got salary caps. So I don't tend to believe that baseball has a problem, that they are the outlier. They are the outlier for a lot of good reasons. And when we talk about those smaller market teams spending money, it's hilarious in many ways that we're hearing about the Pirates and the Marlins finally wanting to spend 1 year after the A's decided that they want to start to spend money. But frankly, I'll believe it when I see it, because the Pirates were supposedly in on Josh Naylor, but they didn't formally make a bid on him. So no credit for that. The Marlins have had conversations in spring training with Yuri Perez, Kyle Stowers. They would like an extension with him as their all-star this past year, but conversations haven't gotten very far. So you've got these 2 small market clubs knowing that There's going to be a lockout potentially on their way, and players are going to be pointing at them saying, these teams are a problem, and a salary cap and a salary floor is not a solution. It's that they're simply breaking the rules. That's a problem. We need to address that. And it's not with the salary cap. So I find it interesting that they're trying to do this little dance right before the clock runs out and the season ends, and we potentially have ourselves a lockout. Final comment from Lux. My friend keeps telling me baseball needs a salary cap if the Rockies want to compete. I'm going to tell him the stat you just pulled. Sure. Again, if you are talking about a single baseball team and a single fan base, the Rockies very well could have the best case to say a salary cap is going to help my team and my fandom more than any other team and any other fan in any other city. Yeah, that's true. But that's not true for a majority of the other 29 teams. It also, again, doesn't necessarily mean because there's a cap, you are going to have people making smart decisions. There's still dynasties in those other sports that have a salary cap. Why? Because they've got the best minds working for them, figuring out the trends or starting the trends before they even begin. And so just because one element to creating and crafting a successful franchise is now a level playing field doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a level playing field and that the Rockies are going to have a better chance. One of the things that was done with the latest CBA was to try and get teams to not tank. Hey, don't lose intentionally, because that's not fair. Don't lose intentionally and then create a powerhouse and then create somewhat of a dynasty like the Astros were able to do, like the Cubs were able to do in the early 2010s. Hey, that's gaming the system. Let's fix this. This is a broken system. Let's fix this broken system to make it more fair for everybody else. Well, what happened because of them fixing that broken system, which I do like this rule. I do like that they did this. But what happened when they tried to fix this broken system to prevent teams from tanking? They created a draft lottery, and the Colorado Rockies, who lost 119 games this past year, now have to select 10th in the 2026 MLB draft. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. You can do as much as you want to try to create a different balance or what you think might be a more balanced way of going about your business and going about the business of baseball and trying to make it fair, make it more competitive. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, right? What's fair isn't always equal. And so to try to make things equal isn't necessarily going to make things fair. The one thing that a lockout and a salary cap and salary floor is going to do is make it unfair for the Players Association, for the Players Union. And it is nothing that you want. You don't want that. So as frustrating as it might be, and as much as you want to look to outside influences for how this organization can get back on track and how this organization can be relevant once again, as much as you want those outside forces to come in and help you and help this organization, the organization cannot get helped until Dick Monfort decides he wants to accept help and he wants to go about doing his business differently. That is going to be the biggest change for the Rockies in getting them pointed in the right direction. Is the owner, is the front office, and is the entire organization with a good plan, not just being on the same page. You could be on different pages, but if it's a great book and it's a good plan, you can be okay. The Rockies need a better playbook. They need to be on the same page, but they need a better playbook. And that's going to fix even more things than anything that a salary cap and salary floor is going to do for the Colorado Rockies. At Patrick D. Lyons on X, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB on Blue Sky and TikTok, Rockies Insider over on YouTube. Again, hope y'all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and be safe. It's Black Friday. It's going to be craziness. Teams are doing like doorbuster teams. I'm thinking about baseball. Stores are teams to me. They really are. But stores are doing all kinds of doorbusters. You're the first 100 people to come in. You're going to get all kinds of free gifts. I'm not sure that they always did that back in the day, but they're doing it now. And yeah, enjoy yourself. Have fun. Have a good weekend. Appreciate you. Appreciate your momentum. But unfortunately, it's only as good as my next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you in the